So please welcome Jen.
Hey everyone, it's great to get the chance to be here and to get to speak with you today. Thank you for coming, and thank you all for organizing this and setting it up. As Beth said when she was reading my bio, I am a writer and I am a filmmaker, but I consider myself primarily, first and foremost, a human rights activist. And writing and filmmaking and organizing, those are some of the tools that I use in my activism. And about a year ago, I found myself, I was giving a talk at the University of Pittsburgh, and during the Q&A after the talk, there was a woman in the audience who asked me, well, what motivates you in your work? Why do you do what you do? And I've gotten that question before, and usually when I get that question, I find myself, I sort of start talking about human rights and social justice and all these concepts that I believe in deeply, believe in the importance of working towards. But at that particular moment, when she asked me that question, I found myself not really wanting to talk about these lofty terms like human rights or social justice. I found myself wanting to talk about my friend Dejan. Dejan is now an almost 17-year-old young man from Savannah, Georgia. Incredible, one of those young men who's, both, poised, able to hold conversations with adults, and then also able to go and play basketball with his friends, and all at the same time carrying, a full course load at an IB program at a school in Savannah, Georgia. Just a really fantastic young man. And I found myself wanting to tell a story that I had recently heard about when Dejan was 13, when he was at that age where his body was changing and he, had to figure out what was going on, and, someone has to sit him down and give him the birds and the bees talk, so his Uncle Troy did that. And that wasn't unusual that his Uncle Troy was the one to have that talk with him, because Dejan is closer to his Uncle Troy maybe than anyone else. So Uncle Troy, one day said, okay, Dejan, come over here. And they went and they sat in the corner, and, Dejan started telling him Troy started telling Dejan the whole talk of, your body's gonna start changing, and, women, they go through certain things, and us guys, we go through certain things, and kind of, setting him straight with all that. And Martina, who is Troy's sister, Dejan's mother, was the one who told me about this talk, and she was telling me that, Dejan has always gone to Troy for whenever there's been things that he needs advice on. And in fact, his Uncle Troy often would help Martina, who is a single mom, discipline Dejan. So if Dejan got in trouble at school, it would be his Uncle Troy who might say, Dejan, you don't go to school to talk, you go to school to learn. And then when Troy was sure that Dejan had kind of gotten the message and was looking contrite, then Troy would say, okay, now, come and give me a hug. As Martina said, Dejan would get his discipline from Troy, and then he'd get his love to back it up. And none of this would be all that unusual or all that striking, except for where these conversations were taking place. Because these conversations were taking place in Georgia's death row prison, in the visiting room, where Dejan's Uncle Troy has been a prisoner since 1991, when he was convicted for the 1989 murder of a police officer in Savannah, Georgia, and where Troy has remained on the death row in Georgia, despite the fact that there is compelling evidence of Troy's innocence. Yet the state of Georgia is determined to execute Troy Davis. In fact, Troy his final appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court were just denied. That happened on March 28th, 2 months ago. And the family right now is waiting for a new execution date to be set. Dejan didn't always know that his uncle was on death row. His uncle has been on death row since before he was born, but he didn't understand that as a little kid. In fact, as a tiny kid, he didn't even understand that his uncle was in jail. Martina would visit, actually the first time Martina brought Dejan to visit his Uncle Troy, he was a 6-week-old newborn. And Martina and Troy have both told me the story of, here she has her little baby and she puts it in Troy's hands, and Martina says that Troy acted like she had just given him a gold bar, and he was terrified. He's like, he's so little, you hold him. Martina's like, no, you hold him. And that was their first their first moment together, and Troy was afraid that just his big hands holding this frail, tiny new body might somehow hurt this little guy. And they immediately became very close. And when Dejan was 2, 3, 4 years old, he didn't understand that his brother was incarcerated. That his uncle was incarcerated. He thought his uncle was in a special school, and because that's what his mom told him. And so they would be going to visit, and then they would leave, and Dejan would say, "Okay, come on, Uncle Troy, come home with us." And Troy and his mom would have to tell Dejan, "Oh, I can't come home with you now." And Martina said, "Well, Uncle Troy's in school. He'll come home with us someday." And then, of course, as time went on, Dejan understood that his uncle was in prison, but Martina hadn't yet told him that his uncle was slated to be executed. She wasn't sure that he was able to really take that information in. But Martina did realize how much her son understood without her having to tell him. And in fact, she didn't realize it until Dejan was 12, when their dog, Egypt, got hit by a car. And when they took Egypt to the vet, her leg was broken in 3 places, and the vet said that the only way to save Egypt's life was a very complex surgery that would cost $10,000. And that if she didn't get that surgery, that Egypt would have to be put to sleep. And so Martina and Dejan, because Dejan went with her to the vet, they're in the car, they're driving home, Martina's head is spinning, where am I going to find $10,000 that our dog needs to save her life? And she was beginning to think, maybe I'm going to have to put the dog to sleep because I don't have $10,000. And as Martina's thinking, all of a sudden, Dejan turns to his mom and says, "Mom, are you going to put my dog to sleep the way they're trying to put my Uncle Troy to sleep?" And that's when Martina realized that Dejan understood not only that Troy was slated for execution, but that actually the method by which the state of Georgia wanted to kill his Uncle Troy is actually the same method that's used to put down an animal. And at that moment, she realized whatever it takes, the second mortgage on the house, pawning the car, that dog was going to have the surgery. There was no way she was going to be able to put that dog to sleep and further traumatize her already traumatized son. So when I was at the University of Pittsburgh and I was asked why I do what I do, I found myself just wanting to talk about Dejan. And I found myself wanting to talk about my friend, Amr Sharab. I met Amr when he was 15 years old. He's from Gaza, and he was a participant in a Palestinian-Israeli peace camp. So I met him at this camp that took place in the States, where Amr was coming to live side by side with Israeli teenagers, engage in dialogue, build friendships, engage in mutual understanding, and then went back home to Gaza. And I stayed a little bit in touch with Amr during those years, and he ended up going to high school, a special high school called United World College in Italy, and then he went to college in the States. And in fact, he had just graduated from Middlebury University and had just moved to Washington, D.C. to try to get a job when the assault in Gaza broke out. That was in December 2008, January 2009, an Israeli assault on Gaza, which led to approximately 1,400 Palestinians being killed. 13 Israelis were killed during the same time period, and hundreds and hundreds of homes demolished, thousands of people injured. And Amr was in Washington, D.C. when that was going on, and I was, of course, following all the news happening, coming out of Gaza every day. And then one day I saw an email in my inbox, and it was from Amr, and the title of the email was, "Help me save my dad's life." And so with my heart pounding, I opened the email and read about the situation, which was that Amr in Washington, D.C. had gotten word that his family in Gaza were driving to check on their farm. Every day during the fighting, there was supposed to be a 3-hour humanitarian ceasefire where people could go out of their homes, stock up on food, get whatever they might need. And Amr's father and his 2 brothers had gone in their Jeep to go check on their farm during those 3 hours. And when they were on their way back from the farm, still during the 3-hour ceasefire, their car came under a hail of bullets from Israeli troops that were stationed nearby that hadn't seen them. And Amr's older brother, Kasab, was shot multiple times in the chest and died immediately. And his father and his younger brother, Ibrahim was 17 years old, were shot in his father in the arm, Ibrahim in the leg, and were still there at the scene of where they were shot, waiting for medical help to come. At the time, his father on his cell phone managed to reach his older brother, who got word to Amr. So Amr was sending out this email, not just to me, but to everyone he could think of who he thought might be able to help during that time period where his father and his younger brother were still, right outside, outside their car, having been shot, and trying to get medical help. All kinds of people trying to help get that medical help for Amr's father and his younger brother. Israeli parliament members try to help. Israeli human rights activists try to help. International activists try to help. A lot of people tried to help. And in the end, the Israeli army did not permit an ambulance to come and help them until the next day's ceasefire, about 22 hours later. By that time, it was too late for Ibrahim. Amr's younger brother had already bled to death. So I found myself thinking about Amr when the woman in Pittsburgh asked me why I do what I do. And I found myself thinking about a wedding that I had gone to. It was a while ago, it was 2004. And the wedding was in Darfur, Sudan. And it was in a village that had recently been destroyed. But there were still people living in the village. They were still living in the riverbeds and in caves, because the village was still the only water source. And when we were there was a wedding that day. And it was kind of an amazing thing that, people were still getting married, celebrating life cycle events, especially amazing because a bomber plane had just flown overhead that afternoon, and the plane did not bomb that day, but the people in the village didn't know that it wasn't going to, and they were pretty convinced that that plane was going to be back and be back soon, and that next time maybe it would bomb again. The people in this village had pretty deep experience with being bombed by Sudanese government flown Antonov aircraft. But yet they were still having this wedding. And the wedding took place outdoors. There was no electricity, there was no dance hall, no band, no music. It was just a simple event outdoors in the dark, and in the middle of the celebration, people started singing and jumping and clapping and chanting, and I was watching. And my colleagues, Adam and Aisha, actually joined in the jumping and the chanting and the clapping. And I, at that moment, felt I was exhausted. I didn't join in. I stayed on the sidelines and watched. But that night, when we were sleeping under the stars, in the midst of this destroyed village, I found myself just thinking about this wedding. Thinking about how amazing it was that in the midst of this destruction, that there was this celebration. And I began thinking about the jumping and the dancing and the chanting and the clapping, and realizing that there was subtext to that. That the people who were jumping and dancing were also saying, "You cannot erase us from our homes." The people who were clapping and the people who were singing, they were saying, "You cannot make us disappear. We are here, and we will continue to resist, and we will continue to resist through celebrating, and through getting married, and through having children." And at that moment, I realized that I should have joined them. No matter how tired I was, I should have found the strength to jump and to dance and to clap with them, because that is a form of resistance that I would very much like to be a part of. So I was thinking about the wedding in Darfur. I was thinking about Amr Sharab. I was thinking about Troy Davis and his nephew Dejan. And I realized that my answer to the woman's question at the University of Pittsburgh was that, yes, of course, I do what I do because I care about human rights. But the reason I care about social justice, the reason I care about human rights, is because I care about human beings. And that in each and every situation that is a human rights atrocity, each and any headline that you see happening on the news, if you just dig under the headline, you don't have to dig far, you don't have to scratch far beneath the surface, because what's below it are human lives and human beings and their dignity and their desire to not only to survive, but their desire to be able to celebrate, to be able to jump and dance and sing and chant. And hopefully what I do and what my work does is support them and stand in solidarity with them. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any quick questions for Jen?
Yeah.
So you did a beautiful presentation as to why you do what you do, but what got you started?
Man, I never know. That's all these questions are so hard to answer. There's not one particular moment, I think, that got me started. I started out working in children's theater in Seattle. I was working at Seattle Children's Theater and then doing work in schools. And for me, that's in some ways part of the same continuum of what I do now, because I was working basically with kids, middle school students and high school students, helping them through theater tell their stories and address the issues that were important to them. And so in my mind, that's also connected to going to Darfur with a video camera and asking people to talk about what's important to them, and their hopes and their dreams and their fears for the future. So I think in one way or another, I've always been doing some version of what I do now. I lived in Jerusalem for 4 years doing peace and justice work with Israeli and Palestinian youth, and I think that was the real turning point in terms of an international focus and in terms of a recognition of how interconnected all these global issues really are. So I think that could be identified as a turning point for what I specifically do now. But I've done some version of that always.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If people want to learn more about some of the things you've described, where can they go? And what can they read or watch?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What can they read or watch?
Probably the easiest starting place for that would be, I've got a website, donkeysaddle.org. So just donkey like the animal, saddle like what you would ride on the animal's back.org. And then through there are links to my films and my books and articles and things like that. And then of course, that might set off a deeper exploration and lead to other places. And I think with so many issues, and probably folks in this room already know this, right? That if you're just taking what the mainstream corporate media gives us, we're never going to get that digging below the surface, but that if we are looking for it and we are digging for it, it is out there for us, but it's our responsibility to find it. And then after Erin Daughter Royce had a great quote. She said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so what we do with it once we've seen it, then that becomes our choice.